Well, good morning. That's a picture of the Wren Building at night, just from a few years ago. And just wanted to record the end of this interview, which I talk about my own operations today, make some interesting comments and say them particularly well at the end of this interview on February 4th for the oral history at William and Mary. But this is more my own history than it is specifically William and Mary. But I wanted to capture it now, so let's have at it. 400 copies. I didn't. People did buy it. People did order it. So the first year or two, it sold. I sold most of the copies. I had a book distributor at the Bookman, which was then separate from who is the main one now. Who's the main book distributor? Ingram. Ingram is the main one now. And but then the interest in the printed copies sort of started dying, as most books do. So I started putting it online just for people to find it, and started making pretty big websites that at the time were just Web 1.0. They were just simply flat HTML files with search engines. You didn't really have to pay anything to have your stuff searched. Google. After the whole .com boom fell apart, Google was kind of dominating everything, and so Google was searching everything, and so you found a lot of my stuff started getting hits, and even though it was relatively amateurish from the point, I didn't work with any organizations. I did everything myself, and I didn't really charge for it. So I did things very differently from the way everyone else did. I didn't have I wasn't really running a business legitimately the way. I didn't even set up an LLC. It was just a proprietorship. But over the years, doing it this way, I had quite a bit of influence on how people were thinking, and I hit that theme over and over again. And probably how many people, probably there were certainly millions of hits over the years.
Yeah,
I had that stuff up. I had that stuff so people would find it.
So how did you feel when Don't Ask, Don't Tell was finally repealed?
Yeah, so that happened when the day. What happened is eventually, a layoff happened at Reliostar after they were bought by ING, and I came back. I stayed in Minnesota for 20 months. It had a pretty good. I raised money for the Minnesota Orchestra, and just calling, and then worked as a debt collector for a while. But I came back and Mother was starting. She was still in decent shape in 2003, but I came back home. And then I really didn't, because I didn't have as much income. I had the income from the investments, from the stock and so forth, and then RA. I worked as a substitute teacher, and then there were some incidents with that. I don't know if you want to go through that, but her condition started to deteriorate a little bit in 2007. And by in the middle of 2009, we started having caregivers in the house, and then she got on officially what they call hospice care, which was continuous from Medicare, and she died on December the 14th, 2010. Now, the day that they announced the bill to end Don't Ask, Don't Tell was Friday, December the 10th. So I went in to a rally on the metro from home to a rally near the Capitol. And while I was there were other caregivers there. While I was at the rally, in the metro, I got a call that something had happened and it was getting much worse. And so I came home by 2:30, and we took her to the hospice, and when people pass away, there's stages they go through, and she went through those stages. But the last thing she ever knew was I had something to do with the end of Don't Ask, Don't Tell. Then she died.
Wow. That's,
at age 97.
Wow.
She hung on long enough for this to happen. Isn't that amazing?
Wow.
And that was okay. But the important thing to remember, the polarity thing morphed in the 1990s. This is outside of my story, but it morphed into Judith Butler and performativities and all that. And academia started promoting gender ideology. And I think one of the reasons, and they claim that it was a metaphysical thing that exists and that you can't argue with it, that it exists. But one of the reasons is that people simply who don't conform to the standards for their biological sex are regarded as morally inferior to people who do. So if that is the way people think, it's not surprising somebody would want to have an ideology that changes, that replaces sex with gender, and has a different way of looking at people's sense of merit and attract. So that's really a threat to gay values too, in a way, because there's so much upward affiliation in gay values that most gay men don't want anything to do with gender ideology or being expected to support it. It's a real threat to them, and that is something that's evolved. But the seeds were in it before, because of all the value system we had, and slowly academia started developing this other way of thinking about it and teaching it in the schools. And then most of us didn't really realize this was going on to any extent, that most of us thought that if trans meant if somebody when they were an adult, yeah, we didn't have, because it didn't happen very often. It wasn't a big deal if Caitlyn Jenner transitioned or Ethan Page instead of Ellen Page or something. That wasn't a big deal because it just didn't happen very often, and it didn't need to be a political problem. It wasn't a problem. But then when they were involving children and involving minors, and then involving women's sports, and then imposing everybody to say their pronouns and everything. Paul, back in the 1970s, with the polarities, he never wanted anything like that. But this all really started, I think, with Rosenfels. I don't think it started with Judith Butler. I think Paul, with his books in the 60s and 70s, had actually laid the ground for some of this.
Interesting. Yeah, I mean, it's interesting that you've had this long history in and around these debates, and we're there in the 70s with Paul thinking about it. And I know it's something you remain actively involved writing about, but I think maybe kind of by way of closing, I'd like to bring us back to William and Mary. We're back on campus, and how does it feel to be back?
It's a sort of closure.
Sure.
Now, I came in 2011 to the homecoming, and at that time they had GLAA, which was replaced with Crimson Dell, I think, and they had formed in 1986. So the attitudes had obviously changed. And then I'm not sure when Crimson Dell was formed, but I came in 2022 again to the homecoming, and not a lot came out of that. But this year I decided to contact you again, with expecting wanting to do a fourth book and everything, which I'm working on. So that's why to wrap up the story. But the books don't. The moral picture I print in the third book, and it has a couple of short stories at the end. They don't. And it also has a depiction of being in the Army made into a short story that's in there too. When something I'd written back in 1969 when I was in the Army, I wanted to publish that. But they don't consider it doesn't even mention gender identity. It doesn't mention the trans issue at all. So the books don't seem very complete unless I take it up. But the other thing that's important is whether when you speak publicly, whether you have the right always to speak just for yourself, or whether you're expected to belong to a group before you speak, whether you're expected to work with nonprofits. It's like salesmanship for my father. He was speaking for a manufacturer, but commercially. Selling things is mostly about selling things that consumers want. And consumers wanted glassware, because they're going to buy in a store. Selling books about political and moral things that have affected a person personally really doesn't work very well, trying to make it a consumer product. And that's the issue I've had with the self-publisher, spending all this money with promotions, book promotions and book fairs and everything, trying to sell more copies. To make the book seem more legitimate is to sell more copies, because you have to be sort of being commercially viable. And yet, commercial viability, think about what happened in the economy, and this is kind of a closing idea, after 9/11, and after the dot-com boom busted, and after 9/11, the economy was troubled. And the jobs people had were mostly hucksterizing, where people were expected. Why don't I go out and sell life insurance since I work for a life insurance company? Or why don't I go out and, there was this one company that was pushing the idea of converting whole life to term and calling people to do that. Was I supposed to do something like that? I mean, that sounds tacky. I don't have to call people, they just find it. But somehow that's unethical. That's too easy. If someone is too privileged not to have to earn his way and to have influence over policy that's outside by their own ability to produce, there seems to be something wrong with that. So that's a very troubling idea, but yet nobody seems to have anything better. Now, internet access is probably going to not be as free as it used to be because of age verification. It's probably not going to be possible for somebody to do what I did the 25 years I did them in the future because of concerns over age verification and the exposure of children and the idea that they're being discouraged, they're being told from wanting to have families, which is a big problem in other countries like Hungary, where they've trying to ban minors from seeing any mention of GLBTQ because they're afraid that they'll grow up not wanting to have children themselves. That's literally what it's about. And also there's whether the TQ belongs with GLB. You know that's a big problem now.
Sure, and I don't think we're going to be able to litigate that today, but I know those are debates you remain involved in. But I guess I just wanted to give you a chance for any last words about, reflections of your time here in Williamsburg.
It was a start. It was kind of a false start because I'd start over. The second time I started at GW, it worked, but then I got graduated and went on. There's never been that kind of a collapse. There was kind of a collapse of the substitute teaching in 2004, 2005. There was a mysterious, was something I had written, and it was not just that somebody found it. I mentioned it to somebody who was working there in conjunction with a newspaper article that had appeared that day about free speech on the internet. I mentioned that I had these, and that caused a big blow up at a school because there was one story in my site where somebody that is like me, called the Sub, gets themselves involved with an underage student unknowingly, because it was an idea similar to a movie called Student Seduction, which is a legitimate film from Lionsgate in 2023. For mentioning the fact that I had a site, which is what caused the problem. When there really was an issue, if somebody put their opinions about things on the internet for anybody to find, and this was before algorithms, this is really important, when people could simply find it with search engines, even before there were algorithms, with Twitter or with Facebook and Twitter and TikTok, particularly TikTok and so forth, even before there were social media algorithms and the saturation with smartphones and all of this kind of thing. Just finding things. If you had people reporting to you, and you were a manager at work, or if you were in a position to underwrite, decide you were an insurance underwriter to decide who got insurance, or if you were a teacher who graded students, and then put your opinions out, that might show prejudice. And I actually wrote an essay about that. That was what I tried to bring up when I was subbing when this whole thing, and I had to stop subbing because of that. That's another mystery. We don't have time. That's not part of this story, but it is a story that I've told in the third book, and I'm going to mention more of it in the fourth book.
Well, I think we can wrap it up there.
Okay.
Yeah.
Do you want to see the book? Just hold the books up to the camera once.
Sure.
Let's just hold them up.
Bring them over. Yeah, you can stay seated.
Yep. Oh, there's the mic. And this is the first one. 1997. This is actually the print-on-demand copy that became available in 2000. In 2000, so I ran out of the first print. And then this is the second one. Was published at the end of 2002, and it was motivated in large part by 9/11, by my reaction to 9/11. And this is the third one, which was published in early 2014, which I just wanted to keep up with the world at the time, and was motivated largely by the internet and how free speech was playing out. I wasn't even aware of the importance of the algorithms yet, because we were only starting to find out, and wasn't even aware of the gender identity issue yet when I wrote this.
Okay.
So that is kind of what I wanted to show you there.
Thank you. Yeah, and I'll say again that these books will be added to the library collection. So if you're interested in reading more, you can look them up. And thank you for your time.
Okay,
we'll wrap it there.
Thanks. Okay, I just wanted you to be able to watch that, and I did my own analysis of my own self-publishing. I think it's kind of interesting. And I do thank you for listening.